She'll never be more than a summer fling to a man like that. That's what they whispered behind her back. But Kaylee was never anyone's fling. She was the one woman who made Julian Wright forget his empire, the woman he left behind to protect the brother who trusted him most. Now, 7 years later, she's the face of the very program he's funding. And when their eyes meet across a ballroom filled with secrets, everything he built starts to crack. Stay with us. What starts as heartbreak often ends in power, because every voice they tried to silence deserves to be heard. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Have you ever rewritten your own story? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Black Stories Untold with love, and ring that notification bell for more heartwarming stories that celebrate strength. Julian Wright sat in his office high above the city, his reflection framed by a skyline that looked too perfect to be real. Below him, Chicago pulsed with life, but up here the world was quiet, empty, suspended in glass and concrete. People called him a visionary, the man who could turn code into gold. At 38, he had built a billion-dollar tech empire from nothing. His name filled magazines, his face filled headlines, and his smile filled every room he entered. To the world, he was calm, elegant, untouchable. But inside the walls of his penthouse, silence ruled. Every object was polished, precise, and cold. Every inch of space was immaculate, yet stripped of warmth. It was not a home. It was a museum of everything he had built to forget. He walked across the marble floor to the piano sitting in the corner. It was the only thing that felt human in the room. The same piano that once filled a small lake house with laughter and light. His fingers brushed the keys, but he could not bring himself to play. The ghost of a smile flickered in the reflection of the glossy lid. Kaylee Walker. The memory of her face, her voice, her laugh still lingered in every note he could not press. She was his best friend's sister, the woman who should have been untouchable. The one person he could not have, the one person who never asked for anything he could give. Julian straightened his cufflinks, the small gesture of control he relied on when emotion threatened to surface. Every move he made was deliberate, designed to hide the truth. He had buried that summer deep beneath success, beneath the empire he built brick by brick as if money could pave over regret. But sometimes when night fell and the city lights turned the sky into fire, he could almost hear her voice, soft, unmistakable, the way she said his name like it was both a secret and a promise. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and stood by the window, letting the burn of it remind him he was still alive. 7 years. 7 years since he last saw her. 7 years since he disappeared without goodbye. It had been Marcus's house, Marcus's family, Marcus's sister. He had no right to touch her, no right to want her, and yet he did. Every cell in his body still remembered that night. The air heavy with summer rain, her hair damp against her shoulders, her laughter drifting through the open window like a song he would never forget. He had built his life around control, yet that night shattered it. The next morning, he walked away. It was supposed to be loyalty. It became punishment. He buried himself in work, in meetings, in endless travel. The world applauded his focus, but it was not ambition that kept him awake at night. It was memory. Now, standing in the silence of his penthouse, Julian felt the same ache he had spent years trying to silence. It lived under his ribs like a second heartbeat. No deal, no number in his bank account, no achievement had ever filled the space she left behind. Kaylee had been the only part of his life that ever felt real. The thought of her was a scar he carried with pride and shame. As the city shimmered beneath him, Julian closed his eyes and pressed one key on the piano. The note lingered, trembling in the air like her voice. Then the room fell silent again. and he whispered into the emptiness a truth he had never dared to say aloud. He still loved her. The lake stretched wide and quiet beneath the fading sun, the surface rippling in gold and blue as laughter drifted from the porch of the Walker family house. It was the sound Julian Wright had come to crave more than rest, more than success, more than sense. Every Friday he drove the 2 hours from the city to this small, sun-soaked world where time felt slower and life was simple. Marcus Walker met him at the door every weekend, grinning, a beer in hand, ready to argue about baseball or business or anything that filled the night with noise. But it was not Marcus who kept Julian coming back. It was the woman who moved through that house like light itself, never needing attention yet always commanding it. Kaylee Walker. Her laughter rolled across the water like music, the kind of sound that stayed with him long after he left. She was always barefoot, her hair wrapped in a loose scarf, her hands never still. She played the piano in the afternoons, soft melodies that drifted through open windows and settled in his chest like a heartbeat. She was younger than him, but carried a confidence that made him forget the years between them. She spoke about sound as if it could heal, about children she wanted to help through music therapy, about the world as if it were still kind. Julian listened, pretending it was idle conversation, but every word she spoke drew him closer to a truth he could not name. Marcus never saw it. He trusted Julian completely, called him family, gave him a room in the house and a seat at every dinner. The three of them would talk long after midnight, the soft hum of cicadas wrapping around their laughter. Yet, even in those moments, Julian felt the danger sitting between them. Every time Kaylee brushed past him in the kitchen or smiled across the table, the air shifted. It was not just attraction. It was gravity, and gravity never asked permission. The night it happened, rain had rolled in without warning. The lake glimmered with lightning, and the old house smelled like wet wood and summer storms. Marcus had gone to bed early, muttering something about an early fishing trip. Julian stayed behind, sitting by the window with a book he never read. Kaylee entered quietly, humming to herself, a candle in her hand. She was wearing a loose sweater that slipped from her shoulder, her skin glistening from the humidity. For a long moment, they said nothing. The candle flickered between them, and the thunder filled the silence. She moved first, set the candle on the piano, turned toward him, and looked straight into him. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then she crossed the room, slow and certain, until she was standing close enough for him to feel the warmth of her skin. When she kissed him, it was not gentle. It was a confession, long overdue. His hands trembled as he touched her face, terrified and alive all at once. The sound of the rain grew louder, pressing against the windows as if to witness what they had both tried to deny. When morning came, the storm was gone, and so was he. He left before the sun rose, his car tires cutting through the wet gravel road. He told himself he was protecting her, protecting Marcus, protecting the fragile balance they had built. But as the lake disappeared in his rearview mirror, Julian knew the truth. He was not running from them. He was running from the part of himself that had finally learned what love felt like. The city became his escape. Tall buildings, endless meetings, a world where emotions had no place. Julian learned to live by schedules and statistics, each success another brick in the wall he was building around himself. People called him driven, ambitious, unstoppable. They never saw the truth hiding beneath the surface. Every deal he closed, every hand he shook, was another way to quiet the voice inside him that still whispered her name. At night, when the noise finally faded, he would look out over the lights of Chicago and see the reflection of the lake in the glass. Still water, unfinished words, the life he could never have. He told himself distance was loyalty. Marcus had married, started a family, and still called him brother. They met for dinners where laughter came easily, but beneath it was the weight of what Julian could never confess. He had built his entire life on the idea that control was strength, that silence could erase sin. Yet every time Marcus mentioned his sister, Julian's heart would tighten. Kaylee had moved to New York after graduation, teaching music therapy to children, living the life she had dreamed of. Marcus would tell stories about her students, about the way she filled every room with warmth. Julian would smile and nod, pretending those stories did not cut through him like glass. The years passed, but the distance did not free him. Women drifted through his life like passing seasons, beautiful but fleeting. He took them to expensive dinners, filled their worlds with luxury, but never let them close. They would look at him across candlelight, searching for emotion in his eyes. But all they found was the echo of someone else. He gave what he could: attention, security, charm, but never his heart. That part of him was still buried in the rain-soaked night he tried to forget. The media called him the man who had everything. They did not see the nights he sat alone in his penthouse, staring at a piano he never played. He had replaced music with noise, love with motion, and passion with distraction. Even success began to feel like punishment. The applause after every product launch sounded hollow, like clapping hands in an empty theater. Every December, a card arrived from the Walkers. Marcus would write in bold letters, always cheerful, always grateful for their friendship. Beneath his name, in smaller writing, would be hers, Kaylee Walker. The ink curved gently, like she had written it with care. Julian would trace her name with his thumb before placing the card in his desk drawer, never throwing it away. It was the only thing that felt real. He told himself she had moved on. Maybe she was married, maybe she had children, maybe she had forgotten. It was easier to believe that than to imagine her thinking of him. Yet some nights, when sleep refused to come, he would close his eyes and see her as she had been. Barefoot, laughing, turning toward him with that look that had undone him in a single heartbeat. He had built an empire to forget, but the higher he climbed, the lonelier it became. Love had not left him. It had simply changed form, turning into guilt that lived quietly inside him, as constant and consuming as the air he breathed. The ballroom glimmered with gold light, chandeliers scattering reflections across marble floors. The sound of soft jazz mixed with laughter and the faint clink of champagne glasses. Julian Wright stood near the stage, his posture effortless, his tailored black suit perfectly cut. The cameras loved him, the guests adored him, and the foundation hosting the gala called him their miracle sponsor. He nodded through conversations about technology and charity, smiling when expected, but his mind was somewhere else. It always was. He had agreed to speak because the cause mattered: music for children who had none, instruments for schools that could not afford them. It reminded him of what he used to believe in before his life became a maze of meetings. When he looked at the photos displayed around the room, kids holding violins and flutes, something tugged at him. A small ache, familiar and unwelcome. He pushed it away, focusing instead on the list of talking points in his hand. A soft laugh cut through the hum of voices. He froze. It was faint somewhere near the back of the room, but unmistakable. His pulse stumbled, his breath caught, and the paper in his hand slipped to the floor. He turned slowly, scanning the crowd. For a moment he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. Then he saw her. Kaylee Walker. She stood by the grand piano, greeting guests with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in any room. Her skin glowed under the golden lights. Her curls swept up loosely as if she had not even tried to be perfect, but somehow was. The ivory dress she wore flowed gently around her, elegant without effort. She looked different, older, more assured, but still carried that same warmth that once filled a small house by the lake. She was speaking to a group of donors, smiling in that easy way that made people feel seen. Julian felt the world tilt. Before he could move, Marcus appeared beside her, shaking hands with one of the organizers. His best friend. The brother he had never confessed to betraying. Marcus's voice was full of pride as he introduced his sister to the crowd around them, talking about her new position as the program's director, how she had dedicated her life to using music as a bridge for children in need. Julian stood a few steps away, invisible in the crowd, unable to breathe. For 7 years, he had prepared himself for the possibility of running into her, yet nothing could have readied him for the reality. Every part of him wanted to walk away. Every part of him needed to stay. When she finally turned and her gaze met his across the ballroom, time fractured. The noise faded. The lights blurred. It was as if the room dissolved, leaving only the two of them suspended in memory. Her expression changed, just slightly. Surprise first, then disbelief, then something else, something careful. She did not look away. Neither did he. The years between them vanished in a heartbeat, replaced by 1,000 unsaid words. Marcus clapped Julian on the shoulder, oblivious to the current crackling in the air. He laughed, thanking him for the donation, saying the children owed him so much. Julian smiled faintly, eyes still fixed on Kaylee. She offered a small nod, polite and distant, like strangers meeting for the first time. But in that single glance, he knew. The past was not buried. It had been waiting, patient and alive, for this exact moment to return. The ballroom had emptied, leaving behind the echo of footsteps and the soft clatter of glasses being cleared away. The air smelled faintly of perfume and champagne, and the lights above had dimmed to a warm, quiet glow. Julian lingered near the back of the room long after the last guest had gone, his tie loosened, his composure gone with it. He told himself to leave, to let the night end like any other gala, but his feet refused to move. At the far end of the room, the grand piano still stood open, and she was there. Kaylee sat with her back to him, her fingers tracing the keys without pressing them. She wasn't playing, just touching, as if feeling for something invisible. The sound of her breathing was soft, steady, and painfully familiar. Julian hesitated before walking closer, the faint sound of his shoes on the marble floor breaking the silence. She didn't turn around. "I wondered if you'd come," she said quietly, her voice calm but edged. "I didn't plan to," he replied, stopping a few feet away. The space between them felt heavier than the whole room. "I had to." Her reflection caught him in the polished black surface of the piano lid. Her expression was unreadable. 7 years, Julian. Not a word. And now you had to. He lowered his gaze. "I know." She pressed a single note, the sound hanging in the stillness like a question. "Why did you leave that morning?" He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment he was back in that storm, her lips tasting like rain. "Because I was afraid," he said softly. "Afraid of ruining everything. Of Marcus. Of you. I thought walking away was the right thing." Her hands stilled. "And it was easier to vanish than to tell me that?" "I told myself it would protect you," he said. "But the truth is, it protected me." Kaylee turned her head toward him, her eyes bright but guarded. "You think saying that now fixes it?" He took a slow breath. "No, it doesn't fix anything. I just need you to know I never stopped thinking about you." The air between them shifted. For a heartbeat, her face softened. Then she looked away. "You had 7 years to say that," she whispered. 7 years to call, to write. "I built a life without waiting for ghosts." Julian swallowed hard. "I don't blame you." Her fingers moved again, this time pressing a quiet melody into the keys. It was one he recognized, one he hadn't heard since the night he left. The same unfinished song she had written that stormy evening. Her hands trembled as she played, but the sound was clear, pure, and devastating. He stepped closer, unable to stop himself. The music stopped. She looked up at him, her eyes wet, her chin lifted. "Don't," she said softly. He stopped where he was, the space between them alive with everything that had never been said. She closed the piano lid slowly, the final motion deliberate and certain. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she stood, her shoulders straight. "You can't just walk back into my life like time never passed." Julian nodded, his voice quiet. "I know, but time didn't make me forget." Kaylee looked at him one last time, her expression unreadable. "Then that's your burden," she said, and walked away. When the door closed behind her, Julian sat at the piano and touched the same trembling keys she had left behind. The melody was still there, waiting for him, the echo of a love that had never really ended. The days that followed were filled with a kind of tension Julian could neither name nor escape. Every morning brought new headlines about his company, new meetings, new demands, but his thoughts stayed anchored to that night in the ballroom and the woman who had walked away. He tried to tell himself it was over, that some doors were better left closed. Then Marcus called. His voice carried that familiar mix of excitement and conviction, the same tone he used when they were young and dreaming too big. He wanted Julian to join a community project in the South Side, a youth innovation lab that would teach kids technology, design, and music. Julian hesitated for only a moment before agreeing. He told himself it was about the cause, but deep down he knew better. Kaylee was part of it. When he arrived at the old brick building that would become the lab, he found her there, clipboard in hand, sleeves rolled up, speaking to volunteers. She was in her element, her presence commanding and alive. She didn't flinch when she saw him, but her eyes flickered, a silent warning that this was not his world to invade. Marcus came over, full of energy, clapping Julian on the back and introducing him to everyone as the project's new sponsor. He had no idea he had just invited a ghost into the room. The work began quickly. Julian handled the logistics, the funding, the connections. Kaylee handled the heart. She brought music to the project, teaching the kids rhythm, expression, confidence. Watching her in that space felt like rediscovering air. She was the same woman he had loved, but stronger now, rooted in purpose. They spoke little at first, their exchanges clipped, professional, yet each glance carried too much history. Every brush of their hands when passing papers, every shared look during late-night meetings drew them closer to something neither of them could stop. Weeks passed, and the project began to take shape. The children adored Kaylee, and Julian found himself staying later than he should, just to watch her laugh among them. It was that laughter that undid him every time. One evening, long after the volunteers had gone, the building was quiet except for the sound of rain against the roof. Kaylee sat at one of the long tables, reviewing lesson plans, her curls falling loose around her face. Julian walked over, meaning to say something practical, but the words never came. A strand of her hair caught in the light, and without thinking, he reached out and brushed it gently behind her ear. She looked up sharply, the air between them heavy and unsteady. Neither spoke. The rain filled the silence, soft and rhythmic. Her eyes softened for just a second, the wall around her cracking enough for him to see the woman who still remembered him. Then the sound of a door opening shattered everything. Marcus stood in the doorway, frozen, the room tilted into stillness. Julian's hand fell away as if burned. No one moved. No one breathed. The look on Marcus's face was not confusion. It was recognition. Understanding arrived like a wound reopening. Kaylee's voice broke the silence first, quiet and shaking. She said they had been going over the lesson plans. Marcus said nothing, only turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Julian stood there, watching the door swing shut, feeling the weight of every choice he had ever made. The air still smelled faintly of rain and music, but the warmth was gone. What had once been loyalty now lay between them like glass, shattered, dangerous, impossible to walk across without bleeding. The confrontation came the next morning, sharp and unavoidable. Julian had known it was coming the moment Marcus turned and walked out of that room. Still, nothing could have prepared him for the sound of his best friend's voice when it finally arrived. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The anger in it was too controlled, too deliberate, the kind that came from betrayal so deep it couldn't find words. Marcus walked into Julian's office without knocking, his eyes hard, his jaw tight. He didn't sit. He just stood there breathing heavily, like a man holding back something dangerous. Julian tried to speak first, but Marcus cut him off with a single glance. "You knew what she meant to me," he said, his tone low, shaking. "You knew what my family meant. And you still went after her." Julian stood, but he didn't defend himself. "It wasn't planned," he said quietly. "You think I wanted this? You think I ever stopped trying to fight it?" Marcus's eyes burned. "You don't get to use that word. Fight. You had 7 years to fight it. You didn't. You hid it. You lied." He turned away, pacing the room. "I trusted you, Julian. I let you into my home, my family. My sister looked up to you. You were supposed to protect her, not make her the reason everything falls apart." The silence that followed was unbearable. Julian could hear the ticking of the clock behind him, each second carving something out of the air. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but broken. "You're right." Marcus stopped pacing. "Then stay away from her." Julian nodded slowly. "If that's what it takes." Marcus stared at him, disbelief flickering in his expression. "That's it? After everything, you're just going to walk away again?" Julian's throat tightened. "If I stay, I destroy everything she's built. Her work, her reputation, your trust. I've done enough damage already." At that moment, Kaylee appeared in the doorway. Her eyes were red, her voice steady but trembling beneath the surface. "Stop," she said. "Both of you." She stepped between them, her presence quiet but commanding. "This isn't about guilt or pride. This is about love that was never given a chance to be right." Marcus turned to her, his voice softening for the first time. "You don't see what this will do to you, Kay. The press, the people around you, they'll tear you apart if they find out. He'll walk away again, and you'll be left to carry it alone." Kaylee looked at Julian, and he saw it in her eyes, the same storm that had lived there all those years ago. "You're wrong," she said. "He's not the man who left." But her voice wavered, and that was enough. Marcus stepped back, pain hardening his features again. Julian wanted to reach for her, but he didn't. He knew what he had to do. "He's right about one thing," he said softly. "If I stay, I hurt you more." Kaylee's hand trembled at her side. "Don't do this again." Julian smiled faintly, though it cost him. "This time it's not running. It's protecting you." He left before either of them could answer. By nightfall, his resignation was on every board desk, every headline calling it a shock. The golden boy of Chicago vanished without explanation. No interviews, no farewell, just silence. Somewhere in the South Side, the youth lab lights flickered on without him, and Kaylee's piano filled the empty hall. The melody was soft, unsteady, but alive, carrying the ache of something broken that refused to die. The seasons turned without asking her permission. One year slipped quietly into another, and Kaylee Walker learned how to live inside the ache of absence. The youth lab still opened its doors every morning, the same children rushing in with backpacks and half-tied shoes, the same laughter filling the halls that once echoed with his footsteps. But something in the rhythm of the place had changed. The donations had slowed after Julian's departure. Without his influence, sponsors grew cautious. Promises that once came easily were now replaced with polite apologies and closed doors. She adjusted, tightened budgets, stretched every dollar until it sang. Yet late at night, when the last child had gone home and the lights flickered low, she would sit alone at the piano, her hands resting on the keys, and wonder if silence was his final gift to her. Then, one evening, a thick white envelope arrived on her desk. There was no return address, only her name written in clean, deliberate handwriting. She almost tossed it aside with the usual bills and grant forms, but something about it felt heavier. Inside was a cashier's check for an impossible amount. 7 figures. Her breath caught, the paper trembling in her hands. Beneath the check was a single note written in the same careful script. "For the music you taught me to hear." She closed her eyes, the sound of his voice rising from memory like a cord held too long. There was no signature, no clue, no need for one. She knew. The next morning she pretended nothing had changed. The staff gathered around her for their usual meeting, and she announced a new wave of funding, enough to secure the next several years of programs. No one asked where it came from. They just cheered. She smiled with them, her hands steady, her voice bright. But inside, her heart was trembling with every word she didn't say. That night, she returned to the piano room after everyone had left. Moonlight spilled across the floor, and she pressed a single key, holding the note until it faded. For a moment she imagined him standing behind her, quiet as he always was, listening. She wondered if he still thought about her, if he watched from somewhere across the city where his name still glimmered on the skyline. She wondered if his silence was peace or penance. She wanted to reach out, to call, to say thank you. But the fear stopped her every time. Not fear of him, but of herself, of what she might give up if she let that love return. It had taken her years to build a life that was hers alone. She could not risk losing herself again, not even for the man who had once taught her how it felt to be completely seen. So instead, she poured it all into the children. She taught them the way he once listened to her, with patience, with attention, with belief. Every shy voice that grew louder, every hesitant melody that turned into song, became her quiet way of loving him back. And in the stillness between lessons, when the world outside fell away, she sometimes felt it, the trace of his presence lingering in the music, not as a wound, but as something gentler. Proof that some connections never end, even when time tries to bury them. The call came just after midnight. Kaylee was grading papers at her kitchen table when her phone buzzed, its sharp ring slicing through the quiet. The words came in fragments, but they were enough. Marcus, heart failure, intensive care. She barely remembered grabbing her coat, only the sound of her keys hitting the floor and her breath catching in her throat. The hospital lights were harsh and cold, their hum filling the corridors as she hurried toward the nurse's desk, asking for her brother's room. When she reached it, she stopped short. Someone was already there. Julian sat beside the bed, his elbows on his knees, his head bowed. The sight of him pulled the air from her lungs. He looked older, wearier, but softer somehow, stripped of the armor he had always worn. The quiet in the room was heavy. Machines beeped steadily, keeping time with Marcus's shallow breaths. Kaylee froze in the doorway, unsure whether to speak or leave. He lifted his head as if he had felt her before he saw her. Their eyes met, and everything between them, the pain, the longing, the unfinished words, rose to the surface. He stood slowly, but she shook her head, signaling him to stay. Her voice was a whisper when she spoke. "How long have you been here?" He didn't answer right away. "Since they brought him in," he said finally. "I got the call from one of the nurses. He put my name down as an emergency contact years ago." She looked at the chart clipped to the foot of the bed, and then at the flowers on the side table. They were fresh, not the kind hospitals gave. His doing, no doubt. "You paid for this, didn't you?" she asked softly. Julian didn't deny it. "He would have done the same for me once," he said, "before I broke everything." The words hung in the air. She moved closer, her eyes fixed on her brother's face. Marcus looked peaceful now, but fragile, as if the strength that had carried him through life was finally giving out. For the first time she saw the man behind the anger, the brother who had tried so hard to protect her that he forgot she didn't need saving. Hours passed in silence. The two of them sat on either side of the bed, the only sound the steady rhythm of machines. Just before dawn, Marcus stirred. His eyelids fluttered, and he looked between them, confusion softening into understanding. His voice was rough, but steady. "You're both here." Kaylee leaned forward, taking his hand. "You scared me," she whispered. He managed a faint smile. "You always did worry too much." His gaze shifted to Julian, the weight of years pressing into that single look. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "About everything." Julian shook his head. "You weren't wrong to protect her." Marcus's breath hitched. "I thought I was saving her. I didn't realize she'd already found what I wanted her to have." He looked at Kaylee again, his voice softening. "Don't let pride steal any more time." Kaylee felt the tears before she could stop them. She nodded, her hand tightening around his. By sunrise, Marcus was resting again, his breathing steady. Julian walked her outside, the cold air biting at their skin. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the city still half asleep. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Kaylee turned to him, her voice low but certain. "He's right. We've lost enough." Julian reached for her hand, hesitant at first, then sure. The morning light touched their faces as they stood there side by side. For the first time, there was no fear, no hiding, no shadow between them. Only the quiet relief of love, finally allowed to exist in the open. The hall shimmered with golden light, filled with the quiet hum of anticipation. Rows of families, teachers, and friends filled the new music center, the air thick with the nervous excitement of children waiting to perform. Kaylee stood near the stage, straightening the collars of her students, whispering encouragement, her smile radiant but steady. Behind her, the new plaque gleamed on the wall, freshly unveiled only an hour before. The Walker Wright Arts Foundation. The sound of her brother's name beside Julian's felt like closure and beginning all at once. She turned slightly and saw him standing near the doorway. Julian looked different now. The world that once demanded all of him had finally released its grip. The lines around his eyes were softer, his presence quieter, grounded. He no longer carried the weight of reputation like armor. He stood beside her openly, not as the distant benefactor or the man who lingered in shadows, but as someone who belonged exactly where he was. As the children began to file onto the stage, the crowd hushed. The first notes of music filled the room, light, fragile, full of hope. Kaylee's eyes shimmered. Each sound, each small voice, felt like proof that something broken had finally healed. This wasn't just a performance, it was a promise kept. She had dreamed of this for years, long before she ever believed it could happen. And now it stood before her, alive and growing. Julian moved to her side, their shoulders almost touching. She didn't look at him at first. She didn't need to. The air between them had changed. It no longer burned with the ache of what-ifs. It was calm, sure, whole. When his hand brushed hers, she didn't pull away. Their fingers lingered, then intertwined. It felt easy, natural, inevitable. For a moment, she let herself look at him fully. The stage lights reflected in his eyes, turning them into soft mirrors of everything she remembered. The storm, the silence, the years that had stretched too long. Her voice came out as a whisper, barely meant for him. 7 years, she said. You hid well. Julian's lips curved into a faint smile. I wasn't hiding, Kaylee, he said, his voice quiet but certain. I was waiting for the right time to deserve you. Her breath caught. There were no grand gestures left between them, no need for apologies, only truth. And it was enough. The final note of the song rose through the hall, strong and bright. The children's voices carried through the rafters, wrapping around them both like light. Kaylee looked toward the audience, families cheering, children beaming, her brother's name shining on the plaque behind her, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Peace. Julian squeezed her hand gently, and together they stepped forward as the applause began to swell. Cameras flashed, voices rose, but this time he didn't let go. They stood in full view of the world, not as scandal, not as mistake, but as two people who had finally stopped running, forgiven by time, freed by love. The music grew louder, a living echo of everything they had lost and found again. When the lights dimmed and the curtain fell, they were still holding hands, walking side by side into the brightness that waited just beyond the stage. Before you leave, ask yourself, who in your life needs to see that love, even when delayed, is never lost if it's real? That forgiveness doesn't erase pain, but it can rebuild peace. This story isn't just fiction. It's a mirror for someone who's still holding on. Share it with them. Help them believe that what was broken can still be beautiful. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.